Hey everybody! In Silksong, we are introduced to the kingdom of Pharloom, where all of its society revolves around the citadel, a golden palace, where a better life is found, where the people of Pharloom can fulfill their sacred duty. The kingdom's religion is centered on it, and the journey to reach it is a holy pilgrimage. A pilgrimage which many of the mortal bugs of Pharloom undertake. To reach the citadel, the pilgrims must face the dangers of the climb. The fiery grounds of the Marrow and the Farfields, the cold and rainy plains of Greymoor, the thorny vines of Shellwood, the raging winds of the blasted steppes, as well as the multitude of hostile and haunted creatures along the way. There's place for rest, like the town of Belhart, the cozy halfway home, and the ripoff that is the Pilgrim's Rest. Mort, you suck! I hate you! However, all pilgrims seem to begin their journey in the same place, Bound Bottom. This camp is located in the Mosslands, and serves as a place for bugs to prepare for the pilgrimage ahead. And there seems to be an endless supply of pilgrims coming from this camp. So ever since I first played this game, I've had this question. What comes before it? From where do the pilgrims come into Bound Bottom? Because in the first Hollow Knight, the starting point for those who traveled into Hallownest was Dirtmouth, a town that actually had houses, and we have confirmation that those that came into it from somewhere else did so from the Wasteland, like Sod, the Knight, and Quirrell did. On the contrary, Bound Bottom doesn't seem to function as a long-time settlement. It only has tents, and we never get to know if the people who are there came from somewhere else. And below Bound Bottom, there isn't much more. Only Moss Grotto, a natural place dominated by the wildlife, and the Weavenest Atla, clearly not a place accessible to regular bugs. You could argue that there's also the Abyss, but pilgrims certainly aren't living there. So, today I'll attempt, and probably fail, to answer this question. Where do the pilgrims come from? Where were they before reaching Bound Bottom? So, let's start with my first answer. Answer numero uno. The Wastes. In the Hollow Knight universe, in the lands beyond the kingdoms, there's nothing but the wastes, endless expanses of dry land, where the winds rage on, and only some non-sapient bugs exist. And my first answer to the question of this video is that the pilgrims originally came from these wastes. This answer is my first instinct, since right off the top of my mind, there aren't much more places the pilgrims could have come from. From what we see in game, Pharloom is seemingly surrounded by the wastes, which tend to be described as a pretty inhospitable place, where not many bugs thrive. So, could it be that those that somehow managed to survive in them end up finding their way to Pharloom and Bound Bottom? Maybe. I think it is a possibility, but there's a bit of an issue with it. This place supposedly only has non-sapient bugs, and the pilgrims very clearly are. How are sapient bugs coming from a place that only has non-sapient bugs? My answer to this question inside my first answer to the bigger question has to do with the Mami higher being of this game. It is a speculation of course, but I feel what's possibly happening here is that the bugs of the wastes find their way to the kingdom by being drawn to it by the pale light of Grandmother Silk. The power of pale beings, as we see with the Pale King, and to a lesser extent Grandmother Silk, is in part what makes bugs sapient in this universe. It could be that her light is what allows mortal bugs to have some sense of higher purpose and direction while traversing the wastes, making them function as more than simple animals. However, there's no need for you guys to comment about it, because I know this whole answer is flimsy as hell and instantly presents a bunch of issues which make it not that plausible. Let's address the idea that Grandmother Silk's light is the thing that draws in bugs from the wastes and allows them to survive in them. In this world, the kingdoms tend to have a higher being at their top, and they are the ones who seemingly give sapience and elevate lesser bugs. That was at least the case in Hallownest with the Pale King. In Pharloom, GMS is the higher being, but besides elevating the Farleads and turning them into weavers, there's no in-lore proof that she does the same or a similar thing for other lesser bugs. That would mean that if we want the wastes to be the origin of the pilgrims, they would need to be sapient by the time they reach Pharloom, which, while possible, doesn't seem to fit that well with what we know of this universe and the lands beyond the kingdoms. There's also a much more pragmatic issue with this first answer, and that is the geography itself. The kingdom of Pharloom is located under a mountain, or a small hill at the very least. A bug-sized mountain if you will. We know this because once we reach the top of the kingdom and go beyond it, we reach the surface, where we find our first exit into the wastes. There are underground exits into the waste as well, like at the edge of Blasted Steppes or at the edge of the Sands of Karak, and also below Weavenest Sindril in the Farfields. These exits seem to lead into cave wastes, which we can tell by the cave background, which is unlike the open background we see in the surface. So we have our locations of the exits into the wastes. The surface, the Blasted Steppes, and the Farfields. and you may have noticed an issue with them in relation to Bone Bottom. None of them connect to Bone Bottom. The surface is literally at the other vertical ends of the kingdom, way beyond the citadel and the end of the pilgrimage even. Blasted Steps is almost near the end of the pilgrimage, so unless they are falling and surviving from this huge crevice that didn't even exist until Hornet broke the bridge, it doesn't make much sense for them to reach Bone Bottom from here. And the Farfields is the closest location to Bone Bottom out of the three. But once again, Pilgrims can enter nor exit a Weave Nest, since they aren't Weavers who can play the needle in. And even if they could, the Farfields is further along the pilgrimage than Bone Bottom, so why would they go there just to retread their steps? There's one possible solution to the geography issue, and that is the bug's capability of digging. During the Steelsoul exclusive wish, A Vassal Lost, we track Sula for Steelseer Sea, only to eventually help them escape. We find Sula here, left of Bone Bottom. After we get rid of the Summon Savior, Sula digs and escapes to the left. This is where the map ends, but to the left of it is probably the wastes. So, if Sula could dig out into them, why couldn't Pilgrims dig into Pharloom from there? But of course, that is supposing Sula is actually going into the wastes, and not burrowing to somewhere else. So, with the Sapiens problem and the geography issue, the answer that the wastes are the Pilgrims' origins is not satisfactory in the slightest. Let's see if my second theory holds some more weight. Answer número 2. The 3D world. Silksong is a 2D game, meaning that we are only able to move left and right and up and down, but not front and back. But even though gameplay-wise Pharloom only exists in 2D, that doesn't mean that this is the case in Universe. In Universe, the third dimension does exist. We see enemies come from it into our 2D perspective, background elements exist, well, in the background, and there's even a couple of moments that Hornet does walk in the third dimension, mostly to enter doorways and such. 3D is a reality within Universe. So, could it be that Bone Bottom, when looked in 3D, is a place of origin for bugs? Well, maybe. Initially it doesn't seem so. Just like I mentioned at the beginning, unlike Dirtmouth in the first game, we don't see houses or any other structures that indicate that Bone Bottom is a town where people live long term before beginning their pilgrimage. But that is the thing, just because we don't see them, it doesn't mean that they don't exist. When we look at the background of Bone Bottom and the walk preceding it, it's really clear that the Mosslands caves are massive. There is a lot of depth here, so could it be that the houses the pilgrims are born and grow up in are hidden among the moss and behind the rocky ground that makes up Bone Bottom? This isn't that crazy of an idea. The Snail's Chapel literally functions in such a way, hidden among tunnels in the Moss Grotto. It's basically its own grotto within. It could even be that the pilgrims' houses aren't even houses. In between the mossy rocks could be rudimentary and wild nests where the pilgrim bugs are born. It would align with their modest culture. All along Pharloom, we find that many of the homes or vaults or little rooms the pilgrims inhabit aren't actually places built for such purpose, but rather structures, either natural or bug-made, that the pilgrims simply moved into, whether to live or work in them. We see this with the Bells of Belhart, now turned into homes, and with Pilgrim's Rest, which seems to be inside the corpse of a Jajan bug. Which makes it even worse for Mort to lock it behind a paywall. My dude, you didn't even build this place, you don't have to recuperate your investment. Mort, you are a motherfucker! The lifestyle of the Pilgrims is one of humility and travel, which leads to a lack of buildings made by them throughout Pharloom. Most of the constructions that exist here are the citadel itself and the many structures made to serve and supply it, like the Silk Mills of Greymoor or the Forges of the Deep Docks. All of that is to say that it would make sense for pilgrims' homes to exist in Bone Bottom besides the tents, and that they would be hidden among the foliage and rocks. But of course, this answer is very speculative. It's basically me going, guys, the houses do exist, we just can't see them. I promise there's a settlement out of view, it just goes to another school, I swear it's real. I do think this answer is logical and could work as a headcanon if you wanted to, but there's clearly no actual evidence to support it. But hey, before we continue, we are halfway through, so let's check with our friend Hornet and see how she's doing. Hi Hornet!
Shaw!
You know, I've always been curious as to what that means.
Subscribe to Jose the Deranged Ranker, he makes amazing videos.
Oh wow, that's crazy, I can't believe that it translates to that. Well, if Hornet says so, then you guys probably should. Okay, continuing with the video. Talking about the idea of the pilgrims having houses and growing up in this area before leaving it did make me come up with another possible answer to the question of this video, which is answer número 3. The pilgrims just pop into existence. Reproduction. The third possible answer about where they come from is that they simply appear. Out of thin air, I guess. Okay, no. By popping into existence, I of course mean that the already living pilgrims have children. I think this is a good time to talk about the birds and the bees. You see, when a father bug pilgrim and another bug pilgrim love each other very much, they do something. I don't know for sure what, no one has ever explained it to me. But whatever it is they do, it results in new bugs, in children who then grow up to become pilgrims just like their parents. So, could it be that reproduction is the answer to how Bone Bottom keeps getting new pilgrims? Once again, maybe! The reproduction and raising process in both Hollow Knight and Silksong isn't something that is particularly explored, which makes sense. I don't think the fantasy bug Metroidvanias should be focusing on the insect parenting and sex life. The only cases we do know of characters directly having and raising children are the Pale King and the White Lady with their billion discarded babies, and the Pale King and Hera having Hornet. But we do see some enemy types, both sapient and more animalistic ones, lay eggs and even give live birth, which is the real way bugs have children. So if the pilgrims are also biologically just bugs and work like their real life counterparts, we can begin to deduce some data. Bugs in the animal kingdom are notoriously fast at reproduction, and they remained as, quote-unquote, children for a very short time, unlike humans and other mammals. It could be that the bugs that live in Bone Bottom have children while being there, and only after doing so begin their pilgrimage, which would explain the endless supply of pilgrims that Bone Bottom offers for the Citadel. It would also explain why a character like Sherma, who is seemingly only a child, can already begin their pilgrimage, and also get farther than most people because he is so pure of heart and perfect and I love him. This idea is seemingly confirmed in this dialogue between Hornet and the caretaker. Here, Hornet states that the pilgrims are descendants of other pilgrims that got injected with silk in the White World, which is what allowed the hunting to spread so quickly. So, case closed, right? The pilgrims of Bone Bottom are descendants of other pilgrims. Well, yes, but also no, because while this third answer is sort of satisfactory, the logic of how pilgrims keep reproducing in Bone Bottom and creating new pilgrims for the Citadel is somewhat inconsistent, as I'll explore in a little bit. But more importantly, this answer still leaves the issue of the first ever bugs that came here, when trying to answer where did that first generation of bugs come from. An idea that comes to mind is that the original Bone Bottom bugs came here from another part of Pharloom, during a time before the Citadel. They lived their lives in the Mosslands for many generations, and only once the Citadel appeared and with it the pilgrimage, they began to leave Bone Bottom, slowly turning it more into a camp rather than a long-time settlement. At that point, the pilgrims would have children, they would grow up really fast and then wait until they grow enough to also have children and only then move out? I don't know, man, this answer makes no fucking sense. I'm honestly running out of ideas, but there's one more possible place the pilgrims may be coming from. Answer número 4. The Void. Okay, no, actually no, stop it. This community is too eager to chart up everything to the Void whenever we don't have an answer for anything. Actual answer número 4. Nearby settlements. So, this is a retread of answer number 1, the pilgrim coming from the wastes, but with some important distinction that may be rooted in lore. So, the idea is that Pharloom actually has more settlements / kingdoms close to it, and the pilgrims are coming to Pharloom from those, and we simply don't see them in game. I know this sounds a little convenient for me. Oh, you know, they come from other places we just can't see anywhere in game, trust me. But there is some evidence to support this idea. Mainly Pharloom's and the Citadel's expansionist tendencies, and the fact that there has been civilizations at the edges of Pharloom that got annexed into it. Mainly Verdania and the Coral Gorge. Verdania in particular is the main proof I have in mind. This kingdom was right at the edge of Pharloom, almost outside of it, and it seems to be an entirely different set of caves, even if under the same mountain Pharloom exists in. So, could it be that there's more settlements next to Pharloom, and could the pilgrims be coming from them? I hate to repeat myself, but you know, maybe! Besides Verdania that seem to exist right outside of Pharloom, we know that Garmond and Zaza come from a village that was overtaken by the Haunting. We never see this village in our exploration of Pharloom, so it is safe to assume that it is outside but definitely near the kingdom, because otherwise it couldn't have been reached by the Haunting. Some people have theorized it is the surface town, but that wouldn't make sense, because we know the Haunting didn't reach that place, since the creatures that lived there aren't silk threaded. And I'm also willing to bet that Garmond's village isn't in the wastes. Garmond and Zaza clearly come from a more civilized place, with an actual society, unlike what the Wastes are. Maybe they had to traverse a little bit of them to reach Pharloom? I don't know how far the threats of Grandmother Silk could reach, but regardless, it has to be close by. So, in my mind, it's totally possible that there are other similar villages, towns, and settlements. And unlike Garmond's home, it's totally possible that these other nearby towns haven't been destroyed by the Haunting yet, and unlike Verdania, were never annexed into the kingdom, since with the Haunting, the Citadel's expansionist tendencies were brought to a halt, making these villages a prime source of pilgrims. The idea of pilgrims being foreigners isn't that much of a reach either. Near the beginning of the game, Hornet tells the Chapel Maid she has just now reached this land, and the Chapel Maid instantly assumes that she is another pilgrim, suggesting that it is normal for bugs to come from outside Pharloom to undertake the pilgrimage. Hey everybody, so I was editing the video and I stumbled across two more details that could be relevant. First, there's this dialogue of Garmond that says "our kingdom", implying that him and his village were a part of Pharloom itself, or at the very least existed on its borders, even if we never see it in game, suggesting that the other hypothetical settlements I discussed in this section could also be similarly located on Pharloom. That would make it so pilgrims coming from outside the in-game map don't need to traverse the wasteland necessarily. But since we don't know where these hypothetical villages, or even Garmond's village is, we don't know if they could connect to Bone Bottom in any way, which is relevant as you'll see very soon. And the second thing is that in the cut ending, we see a bunch of pilgrims entering Pharloom from a tunnel similar to the one in the opening cutscene, giving more evidence to the idea of pilgrims being foreigners. But this tunnel, if it is the same as in the cutscene, connects to Blast's steps, similarly presenting the issue that it doesn't connect to Bone Bottom, which again, is relevant to this discussion. Okay, that's the end of the editor's note. With all of that being said, while I find this answer to be the most interesting,
say the line!
Horsey.
there are a couple of problems with it.
Yay!
The first one is that it would be weird for no pilgrim to ever mention their previous town. This problem can be somewhat offset by the fact that Hornet doesn't really get to know the personal histories of every bug, and since they are so focused on the pilgrimage, that could explain their lack of interest in their original homes, if they didn't start their lives at Bone Bottom. But the second issue I can't really resolve in any way, because we still have the massive problem of geography, with Bone Bottom being, well, on the bottom of Pharloom, and not being close to any entrance or exit into it. Where are the people from these other towns entering from and getting to Bone Bottom? Well, it's... I think... Okay, conclusion. So, what is the answer to the question of this video? Where do the pilgrims of Bone Bottom originally came from? I don't know. I legit have no idea. I threw you guys some options, but like, none of them are very convincing, are they? And more importantly, does it really matter where the pilgrims come from before they reach Bone Bottom? Not really. I know this conclusion basically makes this whole video pointless, but I mean, yeah, it kind of is. The pilgrims' origins are not important, because the fact is that their lack of personal history, their lack of individuality, and their sole focus on the pilgrimage is what's important about them. It tells us a lot more about Pharloom than whether there are towns nearby or not. It tells us how the Citadel uses religion to strip people of their identity, turning them into pieces whose only purpose is to willingly serve. It shows us how deep the systematic use of religion runs in this kingdom, and why it's so necessary for it to come down and be rebuilt free from it. When discussing how terrible the Citadel is, a lot of people focus on the changes brought by the conductors. The greed that spreads all over Pharloom, the inhumane working conditions of the underworks, the extreme luxury and lavishness that only those at the top get to enjoy, their annexation of independent tribes, their destruction of natural habitats, and the horrible experiments conducted in the White World. And don't get me wrong, these things are awful. Pharloom is a kingdom defined by its atrocities, but I think one of their biggest crimes started with the Weavers, and that is the pilgrimage itself. It robs bugs from a life of their own, from the freedom of deciding who they are by themselves, and what it is they want to do with their brief existence. It robs them of their individuality, and indirectly forces them to be a part of a whole. They are pilgrims first and foremost. Even if they succeed and reach the gilded halls, they are turned into choir members, servants to the Citadel first and foremost. So many of these characters don't even get names, they simply are adjective pilgrim, And that's certainly a practical decision. Probably naming every single pilgrim would have been confusing and overbearing, and not every single NPC needs a distinctive personality, but I believe it also helps define them by their pilgrimage and devotion to the Citadel, constructing the narrative of its oppressive rule, one which is not achieved by physical violence, but rather by religious control. So, rather than asking where do the pilgrims come from, I ask, does it matter? No, it doesn't. I still would like to know though, it could be some interesting lore, but whatever, it's fine, I don't care. I know this conclusion isn't necessarily what you would expect from this video, and kind of invalidates its whole purpose. But even if we can't get a straight answer to this question, I still think it is interesting to think about and theorize. That's literally why I made the video, I just kept thinking about this conundrum, and I wanted to share with the class. So let me know what you guys think. As usual, subscribe, comment, like, and that entire algorithm jazz. Okay everybody, have a nice day.